There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from seeing too clearly. You know the one. It settles in at the end of a conversation where everyone around you seemed perfectly content with explanations you found hollow. It surfaces in the middle of a celebration where the joy on display felt somehow rehearsed, and you stood there smiling at the right moments, saying the right words, but privately wondering whether you were the only one who noticed the thin membrane between the performance and the thing itself. You have probably spent a good portion of your life suspecting that something is wrong with you, that your inability to simply go along, to accept the comfortable version of events, to find lasting satisfaction in what satisfies everyone else, is some kind of defect. A glitch in your wiring, something to be corrected, medicated, socialized away. What I want to offer you today is a different possibility. What if the difficulties you experience are not symptoms of something broken, but the natural and unavoidable consequences of a mind that insists on seeing what is actually there? Hannah Arendt spent much of her intellectual life examining what it costs a human being to think seriously. Not to accumulate information or perform intelligence, but to genuinely engage the faculty of thought, to sit with questions that resist easy resolution, to refuse the comfort of received answers. She observed something that most people prefer not to examine, that the capacity for genuine thought creates a kind of distance from ordinary life that is not chosen and cannot be easily undone. The lucid person, the one who sees through surfaces, who notices what others have agreed not to notice, does not experience the world the way the majority does. And the majority, quite naturally, finds this unsettling. What follows is an honest examination of 8 specific difficulties that come with living as a lucid person. Not to celebrate suffering, not to romanticize the position of the outsider, but to name what is real, and in naming it, to offer something that pure reassurance never can: genuine understanding. The first difficulty is one that runs beneath all the others, and it has to do with the fundamental texture of daily life. When you are a lucid person, you find yourself unable to fully inhabit the shared fictions that make ordinary social existence comfortable. Every human community, every family, every workplace, every culture operates through a set of agreements about what is real, what is important, what is too dangerous or too destabilizing to examine closely. These agreements are rarely spoken. They do not need to be. They function through repetition, through the mild social punishment that greets whoever violates them, through the collective performance of not noticing. Most people participate in these agreements without effort because the agreements align with something they genuinely feel. The story they tell about their lives feels true to them. The explanations their culture offers feel adequate. The comfort is not manufactured. It is real. But for you, something keeps interfering. Some part of your mind refuses to perform the not noticing. You're at the family dinner, and you see the dynamic that everyone has silently agreed to pretend does not exist. You are in the meeting, and you see that the confidence being displayed is a costume. You read the headline and you notice the assumption buried in its phrasing that everyone else seems to have swallowed whole. This is not a skill you developed. It is more like an inability to switch off a faculty that others can set aside at will. And the exhaustion of it is real, because you are perpetually doing something that costs energy. You are seeing what is there while simultaneously navigating a world organized around not seeing it. Arendt wrote about thinking as something that occurs between the person and themselves, what she called the two-in-one, the internal dialogue that genuine thought requires. What she understood is that this dialogue, once seriously engaged, never quite stops. The lucid person carries this conversation everywhere. It does not pause for social occasions. It does not observe the polite convention of letting things go. And while this perpetual internal inquiry is the source of whatever depth and insight the lucid person possesses, it is also the source of a very specific kind of loneliness. You cannot fully turn it off. You cannot, for the duration of the party or the movie or the pleasant afternoon, entirely cease the examination. And this means you are never quite where everyone else is. You are always in some fraction of yourself, somewhere slightly aside from the shared experience, watching it, noting it, questioning it. This is the first difficulty, and it is worth sitting with because everything else follows from it. The second difficulty concerns the relationship between clarity and certainty, and the way lucid people are so often mistaken for one when they are actually experiencing the other. People around you frequently assume that because you see through illusions, you must know what is true. They bring you their problems expecting answers because your questions are good and your analysis is sharp, and it reads like confidence. But the actual experience of lucidity is almost the opposite of certainty. The more clearly you see, the more complexity you perceive. The more the clean, simple explanations everyone reaches for reveal themselves as simplifications that leave something important out. You are not more certain than the people around you. You are often less certain because you have pushed past the first layer of understanding into the second and third, where things become genuinely difficult, and the honest answer is frequently that it depends, or that both things are true, or that we do not actually know. Living with this is its own challenge. The world tends to reward confident declarations. It tends to be made uncomfortable by nuance, by the person who says yes but also, or who refuses to collapse a complex situation into a verdict. The lucid person is often cast as the one who complicates things, who will not commit, who always has a qualification. This is experienced as a failure of courage when it is actually, if anything, the opposite. It takes considerably more nerve to say, "I do not know," than to say, "Here is the answer." But it rarely looks that way from the outside. If this is opening something up for you, if you have spent time wondering why your mind works the way it does, consider subscribing. I explore these questions every week, and I would genuinely love to have you along for the inquiry. The third difficulty is perhaps the one that causes the most direct pain, and it lives in the space between what you see and what you are able to say. There is a kind of perception that runs faster than language. You notice something in a room, in a relationship, in a text, before you have words for it. The lucid person is often aware of this gap acutely. You sense the thing but cannot yet articulate it in a way that will be legible to others. And the painful part is what happens in that gap. You reach for the words and they come out wrong, or too complicated, or too qualified, or they land in a way that is easily dismissed. You try to describe what you are seeing, and the person across from you nods politely and then continues as though nothing was said. Over time, many lucid people develop a kind of preemptive self-censorship. They learn which observations will be received and which will produce the particular uncomfortable silence that means you have said something that does not fit. They calibrate, they edit, they offer the smaller, more acceptable version of what they actually see. This costs something. It costs a great deal, actually, because the unexpressed perception does not disappear. It simply goes back into the interior, and over time, the accumulation of unexpressed clarity creates a kind of pressure, a sense of holding more than can be put down, of carrying things that have nowhere to go. I want to pause here because I think something important needs to be said about this particular experience. Many of you watching have spent years in this exact situation. You have been in relationships, in friendships, in workplaces, where what you actually perceived and what was safe to say were two completely different things, and you have learned, perhaps very early, that being seen clearly is not always welcome, that the people who are supposed to be closest to you are sometimes the people least able to receive what you actually notice. This is not a small thing. It shapes how you move through the world. It shapes what you believe about your own perceptions. How long have you carried observations that had nowhere to go? How long have you been editing what you see before anyone else gets to hear it? Tell me in the comments, because someone else watching this right now has been doing the same thing and needs to know it is not just them. And if the words are hard to find, if what I'm describing is familiar but not yet fully nameable, just type this: I have been carrying this alone. Because that is the beginning of it going somewhere. The fourth difficulty concerns time, and specifically the way lucid people experience the future differently from the way most people prefer to experience it. There is a tendency in ordinary social life to maintain a certain optimism about how things will unfold, not necessarily because the evidence supports it, but because the alternative, really sitting with the range of ways things might go, is uncomfortable. Most people are motivated at some level by a mild and functional self-deception about outcomes. This is not a criticism. It is probably adaptive. It allows people to start projects, enter relationships, take risks, without being immobilized by the full weight of uncertainty. The lucid person has a harder time with this because they see the range of possibilities more clearly, including the uncomfortable ones. They notice the ways the current pattern, if not interrupted, is likely to lead somewhere difficult. They see the problem before it has fully materialized. They feel in advance the weight of something that has not yet arrived. This is sometimes called anxiety. It is sometimes called pessimism. It is sometimes called catastrophizing. But often, if you are honest about it, it is simply accurate perception of complexity and risk that other people are managing not to perceive as clearly. The difficulty is that this does not make life easier. Knowing that something is coming does not necessarily give you the power to prevent it, and the period between seeing the problem and its arrival, the period where you know but cannot yet act, or cannot make others see, is one of the loneliest stretches a lucid person regularly traverses. The fifth difficulty sits very close to the heart of what Arendt was trying to understand about the human condition. She was deeply interested in the question of plurality, in the fact that we exist among others, that our existence is fundamentally shaped by the presence and reality of other people who are genuinely different from us, who see differently, want differently, experience the world through entirely different frameworks. And she believed that this plurality, this radical difference, was not a problem to be overcome, but was the very condition of meaningful human life. But for the lucid person, plurality creates a specific and persistent difficulty, because when you see clearly, you also see the depth of the gap between your perception and other people's perception. You see how differently people are working from, how different the interior maps are that people are using to navigate the same territory. And this creates a kind of loneliness that is not about being unloved or unvalued, but about the experience of fundamental untranslatability. You can spend an entire evening in conversation and come away feeling that nothing real was exchanged, not because the people were unkind or the conversation was bad, but because what you are actually experiencing and what they are actually experiencing are so different that the words in the middle, however well chosen, do not quite carry across the gap. This is not a fixable problem. This is not a communication skill deficit or a social anxiety that could be treated. It is a genuine feature of the situation, and Arendt would say that the appropriate response is not to try to close the gap, not to insist on being fully understood, but to accept that the gap is the condition of genuine encounter, that we meet across the gap not by collapsing it. But knowing this intellectually and experiencing it on a Tuesday evening, having just come from a gathering where you felt peripheral to your own life, are two very different things. And the lucid person deserves to have it acknowledged that the experience of this untranslatability is genuinely hard, regardless of whether it is philosophically necessary. The sixth difficulty is one that the lucid person rarely talks about because it sounds on the surface like a complaint about being too good at something. It has to do with the way clarity corrodes certain pleasures. There are satisfactions that depend, for their full operation, on a certain degree of not examining them. The pleasure of a simple narrative, of a story with clean heroes and clean villains. The pleasure of a belief held without complication. The comfort of a community whose premises you accept wholesale. The satisfaction of being certain you are right. These are real pleasures. They are not available to everyone, and the lucid person, once they have seen through the structure of a thing, cannot unsee it. They can appreciate the craft of a propaganda film without being able to believe it. They can recognize the function of a ritual without being able to feel its force in the way they once did. They can understand why a certain story is comforting without being comforted by it. This is sometimes experienced as loss, and it is a loss. Not a tragic one, but a real one. The philosopher Bernard Williams wrote about what he called the costs of reflectiveness, the ways that examining your own values and experiences can displace the unreflective absorption that makes certain things fully enjoyable. Lucid people pay this cost constantly. They are watching even when they would rather be simply living. And while this watching is also, in another sense, its own rich way of being alive, it would be dishonest not to acknowledge what it costs. The seventh difficulty follows directly from the sixth, and it concerns the particular problem of motivation. Most people are driven by goals that derive their force from not being too closely examined. The desire for status, for security, for recognition, for comfort. These are powerful motivators when held with a certain opacity. The moment you look directly at them, ask what exactly you are hoping they will do for you, whether achieving them has, in your experience, actually produced what you anticipated. The force tends to diminish. The lucid person does this, often involuntarily, to their own desires. They reach for the thing, and something in them is already noting that reaching for the thing is not the same as the thing, and the thing will not finally resolve what reaching is really reaching for. This creates, in the worst periods, a kind of motivational suspension. Not depression in the clinical sense, though it can be accompanied by depression, but a kind of seeing through the usual reasons before they have had time to actually move you. You know you should care about the outcome, and you see exactly why the outcome seems worth caring about, and something in you simply does not, fully, follow the reasoning into action. This is bewildering to people around you, and it is bewildering to yourself. It can look like laziness or passivity or lack of ambition, when it is actually the consequence of a mind that keeps interrupting its own drives, with the question of whether those drives are, in the deepest sense, pointing somewhere real. The eighth difficulty is the one that, in my observation, most often goes unacknowledged, perhaps because it requires admitting something that lucid people are reluctant to admit. It has to do with the relationship between seeing clearly and acting well. There is an assumption, sometimes held by lucid people themselves, that clarity of perception should translate into clarity of action, that seeing truly should produce living well. But this is not how it works. Perception and action belong to different registers of existence. Arendt was very precise about this. She distinguished sharply between the life of the mind and the life of action, between the vita contemplativa and the vita activa, and she insisted that the transition between them was not automatic and was not guaranteed. Seeing what is true does not tell you what to do. Understanding a problem with great sophistication does not guarantee the ability to respond to it wisely, and the lucid person who has spent years developing their perceptive capacity sometimes discovers, with real distress, that this capacity has not automatically produced a corresponding capacity for living. They see the dynamic in the relationship, but do not know how to change it. They see the pattern in themselves with great clarity, but cannot seem to interrupt it. They see what needs to happen in a situation, but are unable to make it happen. This gap between perception and agency is one of the most privately agonizing experiences a lucid person can have, because from the outside, and often from the inside, it looks like a failure of will or courage or character. But it is not that. It is the recognition that understanding is necessary but not sufficient, that the examined life still has to be lived, and that living it requires something other than, and beyond, the act of examination. These 8 difficulties are not a diagnosis. They are not a map of pathology. They are something closer to what Arendt was always trying to do, an honest description of what certain kinds of existence actually cost, named with enough precision that the person experiencing them might recognize themselves and feel even briefly less alone in the recognition, because there is something that happens when you see your own experience named accurately, not fixed, named. The loneliness does not vanish, the difficulties do not resolve, but something in the interior shifts, because you have moved from the experience of private, nameless struggle to the experience of being a specific kind of person having specific, explicable difficulties. And that is different. That has weight. If what I have been exploring here has resonated with you, if you have spent time wondering whether your particular way of experiencing the world is a burden or a capacity, or perhaps, honestly, both at once, I want you to know that this channel exists precisely for that question. There are many people walking this particular road, people who think too clearly to accept easy comfort, people who carry perceptions that have nowhere to go, people who are exhausted by their own lucidity and ashamed of that exhaustion. I make these videos for that community, not because I have resolved the difficulties, but because sitting with them thoughtfully, together, changes something. If you are not subscribed, I would be honored to have you here. Not to fix what you are experiencing, but to keep looking at it honestly, week after week, with the kind of rigor and care it deserves. Subscribe if this is the kind of company you are looking for. And tell me in the comments, which of these 8 difficulties sits heaviest with you right now? I read every single one. What Arendt ultimately insisted upon was that the thinking person, the one who refuses the comfort of unexamined answers, does something necessary for the rest of us, something that the world tends to make costly, but that the world also, in its better moments, cannot do without. The lucid person is not simply someone with a difficult temperament. They are someone whose mind performs a function that is genuinely valuable, even when it is personally hard to bear. The difficulty is not incidental to the capacity. It is inseparable from it. You cannot have the perception without paying the cost of the perception. And perhaps the deepest reframe available is not that the difficulties will go away, or that they can be managed into irrelevance, but that they can be recognized for what they are. Not the signs of a broken instrument, but the friction of a particular kind of mind moving through a world that has not yet fully learned how to receive what it sees. You are not too much. You are not wrong. You are seeing what is there. And somewhere, in the gap between that seeing and the world's readiness to receive it, there is the specific work of your life, not to stop seeing, but to keep finding the forms, the words, the communities, the quiet conversations through which what you see can finally, slowly begin to matter.